The morning sun painted the endless Wyoming sky in shades of amber and gold. As Thomas "Tom" Crawford stood on his front porch, coffee mug in hand, listening to the only sounds that had kept him company for the past 8 years, the wind whistling through the prairie grass and the rhythmic creaking of the rusty gate that led to his pasture. At 45, Tom was a man weathered by both the elements and life's disappointments. His ranch, the Double C, sprawled across 1,500 acres of some of the most beautiful and isolated land in Carbon County. It was the kind of place that could make a man feel like the king of his own world or the loneliest soul on earth, depending on his state of mind. This morning, like most mornings for the past 8 years, Tom felt like the latter. The gate's squeaking had become his alarm clock, his dinner companion, and his lullaby. He'd been meaning to oil those hinges for years, but somehow the sound had become a comfort proof that something else on the ranch was still moving, still alive, still making noise in the overwhelming silence. Tom's day began the same way it had for nearly a decade, checking on his small herd of cattle, fixing whatever the Wyoming weather had broken overnight, and trying to fill the hours until sunset with enough work to exhaust himself into sleep. It was a routine born of necessity rather than choice, a way to avoid thinking about the dreams he'd buried along with his wife Margaret 8 years ago. Margaret had been the heart of the Double C. She'd been the one who talked about filling the ranch house with children's laughter, about building swing sets in the yard and teaching little ones to ride horses. Tom had shared those dreams completely, but fate had other plans. Margaret's battle with cancer had been brief and brutal, ending not only her life but what felt like Tom's future. The adoption papers were still in the filing cabinet in his office, yellowed with age and untouched since the day Margaret died. They had been so close to completing the process, just waiting for the final home inspection. That never came. As Tom walked toward the barn, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground, he caught sight of movement on the horizon. A county vehicle was making its way up his long gravel driveway, thus trailing behind it like a brown ribbon against the blue sky. Tom rarely had visitors. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, and the small town of Riverside was a 40-minute drive on a good day. He set down his coffee mug and waited as the vehicle approached, curious about what could bring anyone to his remote corner of the world. The SUV came to a stop near the house, and out stepped a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the kind of clothing that suggested she was used to outdoor work, but carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Mr. Crawford, I'm Sarah Martinez from the Department of Family Services," she said, extending her hand as she approached. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit, but I was in the area and wanted to speak with you about something important." Tom shook her hand, wondering what the Department of Family Services could possibly want with him. "Of course, would you like to come inside? I can put on a fresh pot of coffee." "That would be nice, thank you." Tom led her into the ranch house, acutely aware of how quiet and empty it felt with another person inside. The house was clean but sparse, furnished with the practical needs of a single man who spent most of his time outdoors. The absence of personal touches, photos, decorations, anything that suggested a life beyond mere survival was obvious. "This is a beautiful place," Sarah said, looking out the kitchen window at the vast expanse of prairie. "How long have you lived here?" "Born and raised," Tom replied, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "My father built this house in 1972. I took over the ranch when he passed 15 years ago." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "Mr. Crawford, I'm here because your name came up in our system. We have records that show you and your wife began adoption proceedings several years ago." Tom's hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. The mention of Margaret and their shared dreams hit him like a physical blow. That was a long time ago. "My wife passed away before we could complete the process. I'm sorry for your loss," Sarah said gently. "But Mr. Crawford, I'm here because we have a situation that might interest you." "Are you familiar with emergency placements?" "Not really. Sometimes we have children who need immediate placement due to emergency situations. Traditional foster families aren't always available, especially for longer-term placements. We've been reviewing our files for alternative options." and your name appeared as someone who had previously expressed interest in adoption." Tom set down his coffee, his mind racing. "Are you saying you want to place a child here with me?" "I'm saying we have a 10-year-old boy who desperately needs a stable home, and you have a ranch that could provide exactly the kind of environment he needs." Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file folder. "His name is Danny Peterson. He's been in the foster system for 2 years since his grandmother, who was raising him, passed away. He's had several placements, but none have worked out long-term." She opened the file and showed Tom a photograph of a boy with sandy brown hair and serious blue eyes, even in the picture. Danny looked like a child who had seen too much disappointment. "What's his story?" Tom asked, studying the photograph. "Danny's had a rough start. His parents died in a car accident when he was 6. His grandmother took him in, but she was elderly and in poor health. Since her death, he's been through 4 different foster homes. It's not that he's a difficult child, quite the opposite, but he's been disappointed so many times that he's developed some trust issues." Sarah turned a page in the file. "The thing is, Danny loves the outdoors. He's fascinated by animals and has expressed interest in ranch work. His last foster family lived on a small farm, and that's where he seemed happiest. But they couldn't make it work long-term due to financial constraints." Tom found himself staring at the photograph, seeing something familiar in the boy's expression, a loneliness that matched his own. "Why me?" Tom asked. "I'm single. I live in the middle of nowhere, and I have no experience raising children." "Because you applied once before, which means you understand the commitment involved. Because you have a stable income and a safe environment. And because sometimes unconventional placements work better than traditional ones." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Crawford, I'll be honest with you. Danny needs someone who won't give up on him. He needs stability and patience. He needs someone who understands that trust has to be earned slowly." Tom looked out the window at his empty, silent ranch. The wind was picking up, and he could hear the familiar squeak of the rusty gate. "I don't know," he said quietly. "It's been just me for so long. I'm not sure I'm the right person to help a child who's already been through so much." "Would you at least consider meeting him?" Sarah asked. "No commitment, just a meeting. Let you both see if there might be a connection." Tom was quiet for a long moment, torn between the fear of opening his heart again and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the silence on his ranch didn't have to be permanent. "Where is he now?" he finally asked. "In a temporary placement in Cheyenne. It's not ideal. He's in a group home with several other children, and he's not adjusting well to city life." Tom thought about the boy in the photograph, imagining him trapped in an urban environment when what he clearly needed was space and freedom. "What would meeting him involve?" "I could bring him here for an afternoon visit. Let him see the ranch, meet you in a relaxed environment. If you both feel comfortable, we could arrange for a longer visit. If it seems like a good fit, we could begin the placement process." Tom stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of his property. For 8 years, he had been the only human voice on the Double C. The idea of hearing a child's laughter echoing across the pastures was both thrilling and terrifying. "Mr. Crawford," Sarah prompted gently. Tom turned back to her, his decision made before he fully understood it himself. "Bring him out this weekend," he said. "Let's see what happens." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. "I think that's a wonderful idea. And Mr. Crawford, thank you for being open to this. Danny needs someone who believes in second chances." As Tom watched Sarah's SUV disappear down his driveway, he remained standing on his porch, listening to the familiar sounds of wind and creaking metal. But for the first time in 8 years, he found himself imagining what other sounds might soon join them. A boy's voice calling to the cattle, boots running across the wooden floors of the house, maybe even laughter carrying on the prairie wind. The rusty gate squeaked again, but this time it sounded less like loneliness and more like possibility. Tom had 3 days to prepare for the most important visitor the Double C had seen in years. 3 days to figure out how to be something he'd never been before, a father to a boy who needed to believe that not all adults would let him down. 3 days to transform a house filled with silence into a home that might hold hope. Saturday Morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Wyoming famous. Tom had been awake since before dawn, not from his usual routine, but from a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. He'd spent the previous 3 days preparing the ranch, as if it were about to be inspected by royalty instead of visited by a 10-year-old boy. The guest bedroom, which had served as a storage room for the past 8 years, had been cleared and cleaned. Tom had driven to town twice during the week, first to buy a proper bed, to replace the old cot that had been gathering dust, and then to purchase what he hoped were age-appropriate items, books about horses and ranching, a few simple toys, and a warm jacket in case Danny wanted to explore outside. He'd even oiled the rusty gate. The sudden silence where the familiar squeak used to be felt strange, like losing an old friend. But Tom had realized that some changes, even small ones, were necessary if he was serious about this possibility. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah's SUV appeared on the horizon. Tom watched from his kitchen window as it approached, his heart beating faster than it had during any cattle drive or storm he'd weathered. Through the windshield, he could see a small figure in the passenger seat, and his hands began to sweat. Despite the cool autumn air, Tom walked out to greet them, trying to appear calm and welcoming while internally questioning every decision that had led to this moment. What did he know about children? What if Danny hated the isolation? What if Tom said something wrong or failed to connect with the boy? The SUV came to a stop, and Sarah stepped out with an encouraging smile. "Beautiful day for a ranch visit," she said cheerfully. The passenger door opened more slowly, and Danny Peterson emerged, looking even smaller in person than he had in his photograph. He wore a clean but well-worn jacket and jeans that were slightly too big for his thin frame. His sandy hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes took in the vastness of the ranch with an expression that seemed equal parts wonder and wariness. "Danny," Sarah said gently, "this is Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford, meet Danny." Tom crouched down to the boy's eye level, remembering something Margaret had once told him about talking to children. "Hi, Danny. Welcome to the Double C Ranch. Thank you for coming out to visit." Danny nodded politely but didn't speak. His eyes continued to survey the ranch, taking in the barn, the pastures, and the mountains visible in the distance. "Would you like to see the cattle?" Tom asked. "Or maybe the horses?" For the first time, Danny's expression showed genuine interest. "You have horses?" "3 of them. Want to meet them?" Danny looked to Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like a great idea." As they walked toward the barn, Tom pointed out various features of the ranch, explaining how the different areas were used and what daily life was like on the Double C. Danny listened attentively, but remained quiet, his small hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. The barn was Tom's pride and joy, clean and well organized with 3 stalls housing his horses: Ranger, a gentle bay gelding; Bella, a mare with a sweet disposition; and Scout, a young horse Tom had been training. "This is Ranger," Tom said, approaching the first stall. "He's 15 years old and about as calm as they come. Would you like to pet him?" Danny approached cautiously, extending his hand toward the horse's nose. When Ranger sniffed his palm gently, Danny's face lit up with the first real smile Tom had seen. "He's soft," Danny said quietly. "He likes you," Tom observed. "Horses are good judges of character." They spent the next hour in the barn, with Danny gradually becoming more comfortable around the animals. He asked questions about their care, their personalities, and how long Tom had owned them. With each question, his voice grew a little stronger, his posture a little less guarded. "Mr. Crawford," Danny said as Tom demonstrated how to properly brush a horse, "do you live here all by yourself?" The question was asked with the directness that only children possessed, and Tom felt its weight. "Yes, I do. It's been just me for quite a while now. Don't you get lonely?" Tom paused in his brushing, considering how to answer honestly without being inappropriate. "Sometimes I do. This is a big place for one person." Danny nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "I get lonely too, even when there are lots of people around." The simple statement hit Tom harder than he'd expected. Here was a child who understood the difference between being alone and being lonely, who had learned at 10 years old that solitude and loneliness weren't the same thing. "Would you like to help me feed the cattle?" Tom asked, sensing that Danny needed to be useful, to have a purpose. "Really, you'd let me help, if you want to. It's one of the most important jobs on a ranch." For the next 2 hours, Danny threw himself into ranch work with an enthusiasm that surprised both Tom and Sarah. He helped carry feed buckets, opened and closed gates carefully, under Tom's supervision, and even assisted in moving a small group of cattle from one pasture to another. "You're a natural," Tom told him as they watched the cattle settle into their new grazing area. "Have you worked with animals before?" "A little. My last foster family had some chickens and a goat. I like taking care of them." Danny's expression grew thoughtful. "But they said I couldn't stay because they were moving to an apartment in the city." Tom heard the disappointment in the boy's voice, the resignation of someone who had learned not to get too attached to good things because they might be taken away. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah mostly observed from a distance, occasionally taking notes, but generally allowing Tom and Danny to interact naturally. What she saw was encouraging: a lonely man and a lonely boy discovering that they might have something valuable to offer each other. When it came time for the evening feeding routine, Danny insisted on helping despite being obviously tired. He carried water buckets that were probably too heavy for him and carefully measured out grain under Tom's guidance. "Danny," Tom said as they finished up, "you've been a real help today." "Thank you." "You're welcome. I like it here." Danny paused, then asked quietly, "Mr. Crawford, are you thinking about adopting me?" The question was asked with such vulnerability that Tom felt his heart clench. Here was a child who had learned to protect himself by addressing difficult topics directly, who had probably heard adults discussing his future without including him in the conversation too many times. Tom knelt down so he was at Danny's eye level again. "I'm thinking about it, yes. But more importantly, what do you think about it? This is a pretty isolated place. The nearest town is far away, and there aren't any other kids around." Danny considered this seriously. "I like quiet places, and I like animals better than most people anyway." He paused. "Would I get to help with the ranch work every day, if you wanted to? There's always something that needs doing on a ranch, and I could learn to ride the horses." "Absolutely. Ranger would be perfect for learning on." Danny's face brightened with something that looked like hope, quickly tempered by caution. "What if it doesn't work out? What if you decide you don't want me anymore?" The question revealed so much pain that Tom had to take a moment to compose himself before answering. "Danny, I can't make promises about the future. Nobody can. But I can tell you that if you came to live here, I wouldn't give up on you easily. This ranch has plenty of room for mistakes and learning and growing up." Sarah approached them as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "How did everyone enjoy the afternoon?" she asked. "It was great," Danny said immediately. "Mr. Crawford taught me how to brush horses and feed cattle, and he said I could learn to ride." "That sounds wonderful." "Danny, why don't you go look at that sunset while Mr. Crawford and I talk for a minute?" Danny walked a few yards away, clearly within earshot, but politely pretending not to listen. "How do you feel about today?" Sarah asked Tom quietly. Tom watched Danny standing silhouetted against the vast prairie sky, looking more relaxed than he had when he'd arrived that morning. "I think he belongs here," Tom said simply. "I think we might be good for each other." And the practical concerns, the isolation, the responsibility, the changes to your life? Tom had been thinking about those questions all afternoon. "Sarah, I've been living alone on this ranch for 8 years, telling myself I was content with just the wind and the cattle for company. Today I remembered what it feels like to have someone to talk to, someone to teach, someone who needs me for more than just providing feed and water." He paused, watching Danny crouch down to examine something in the grass. "That boy has been through more disappointment than any child should face, but he still has hope. He still wants to trust. If he's willing to take a chance on me, then I'm willing to take a chance on him." Sarah smiled. "I think that's exactly what Danny needs to hear." As they loaded back into the SUV for the drive back to Cheyenne, Danny rolled down his window. "Mr. Crawford," he called. "Yes, thank you for today. It was the best day I've had in a long time." Tom felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. "Thank you for visiting. Danny, I hope you'll come back soon. Do you really think I could live here?" Tom looked at the boy's hopeful face framed in the car window and made a decision that he knew would change both their lives. "I think we should find out," he said. "If you want to give it a try, I'd like that very much." As the SUV disappeared down the long driveway, Tom stood alone on his porch once more. But the silence felt different now. Instead of emptiness, it felt like anticipation. Instead of ending, it felt like beginning. For the first time in 8 years, the Double C Ranch was about to become more than just a place where one man lived alone with his memories. It was about to become a home where a man and a boy could learn together what it meant to be a family. The oiled gate stood silent in the evening breeze, but Tom no longer missed its rusty squeak. Soon, he hoped, there would be new sounds to fill the prairie air. 2 weeks later, Tom found himself standing in the same spot on his porch, but everything felt different. Today, Danny wasn't just visiting, he was coming home. The placement process had moved quickly once both Tom and Danny expressed their enthusiasm for making it work. Social services had conducted thorough interviews, home inspections, and background checks, but Sarah had expedited everything she could. Danny's eagerness to leave the group home in Cheyenne and Tom's obvious commitment to making the placement successful had convinced everyone involved that this was the right decision. Tom had spent the 2 weeks making final preparations. The guest bedroom was now officially Danny's room, complete with a window overlooking the pasture where the horses grazed. He'd installed a desk for homework, put up shelves for books and personal items, and even hung pictures of horses and ranch life on the walls. But more importantly, Tom had been preparing himself mentally for the reality of sharing his space, his routine, and his life with a 10-year-old boy. It had been decades since he'd lived with anyone other than Margaret, and he was nervous about everything from meal planning to establishing household rules. Sarah's SUV appeared right on schedule, but this time it was followed by a second vehicle, a social services van carrying Danny's belongings. As Tom watched them approach, he felt the familiar nervousness mixed with something new, excitement. Danny emerged from the SUV carrying a stuffed horse that was clearly well-loved and a backpack that seemed to contain his most precious possessions. He looked around the ranch with the expression of someone seeing home for the first time. "Ready to get settled in?" Tom asked, walking down to meet them. "Yes, sir," Danny replied, then hesitated. "Mr. Crawford, what should I call you?" It was a question Tom hadn't fully considered, but looking at the boy's expectant face, the answer came naturally. "Well, my friends call me Tom. Would that work for you?" Danny's face brightened. "Yes, sir. Yes, Tom." The process of moving Danny's belongings into the house was surprisingly quick, a sobering reminder of how little the boy owned. A few bags of clothes, some books, a photo of his grandmother, and a small collection of toy horses made up most of his possessions. "This is your room," Tom said, leading Danny upstairs. "You can arrange it however you like." Danny set his stuffed horse carefully on the bed and looked around with wonder. "It's really mine, really yours. The bathroom is right across the hall, and my room is at the end of the hallway if you need anything during the night." Danny walked to the window and looked out at the view. "I can see Ranger from here. I thought you might like that. Come on, let's go introduce you to your new daily responsibilities." For the next hour, Tom walked Danny through the ranch routine, explaining feeding schedules, safety rules, and the various chores that kept the Double C running smoothly. Danny listened intently, asking practical questions and taking mental notes about everything from where the tools were stored to how to properly close the feed room door. "The most important thing to remember," Tom said as they stood in the barn, "is that the animals depend on us. They can't feed themselves or fix their own water troughs. So even when we don't feel like it, even when it's cold or we're tired, we take care of them first. Like my grandma used to say about her garden," Danny said thoughtfully. "She said plants can't wait for you to feel like watering them." Tom smiled, hearing wisdom in the comparison. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a smart woman." "She was. She taught me that if you take care of things that can't take care of themselves, they'll take care of you back." That evening, as they sat down to their first dinner together. Tom realized he'd been overthinking the transition. Danny was polite but comfortable, asking questions about the ranch and sharing stories about his previous experiences with animals. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by the sounds of silverware on plates and the familiar evening wind. Outside, "Tom," Danny said as they cleaned up after dinner, "is it okay if I write a letter to Mrs. Henderson at the group home? I want to tell her I'm okay." "Of course, that's very thoughtful of you. She was nice to me when some of the older kids weren't. I don't want her to worry." Tom was struck by the boy's maturity and consideration for others, especially given everything he'd been through. "Danny, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you stay so positive after everything that's happened to you?" Danny considered the question seriously, drying a plate with careful concentration. "My grandma used to tell me that being sad about things you can't change is like trying to water dead plants. She said it's better to spend your energy helping new things grow." Tom stopped washing dishes, moved by the simple wisdom. "She really was a smart woman. Yeah, I think she would like you." That night, after Danny was settled in his room, Tom sat on his porch listening to the evening sounds. But tonight, there were new additions to the familiar symphony of wind and cattle, the sound of water running upstairs as Danny brushed his teeth, the creak of floorboards as the boy moved around his room, and the soft murmur of his voice as he talked to his stuffed horse. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't for 8 years. The next morning, Tom was awakened not by his alarm, but by the sound of small boots on the stairs. He checked his clock. 5:30 a.m., half an hour before he usually got up. "Danny," he called quietly. "I'm sorry if I woke you up," came the whispered reply. "I wanted to help with the morning feeding." Tom smiled, remembering his own eagerness as a boy to be part of the ranch work. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed, and we'll go together." As they walked to the barn in the pre-dawn darkness, Danny chattered excitedly about his first night in his new room, how comfortable the bed was, and how he'd watched the stars through his window before falling asleep. "Tom," he said as they reached the barn, "thank you for letting me live here. I promise I'll work really hard and not cause any trouble." Tom stopped walking and turned to face the boy. "Danny, you don't have to earn your place here by being perfect. This is your home now. That means you're allowed to make mistakes, ask questions, and just be a kid sometimes. Really, really. The only thing I ask is that you be honest with me. If something's bothering you or you don't understand something, tell me. We'll figure it out together." Over the following weeks, Tom and Danny settled into a routine that worked for both of them. Mornings began with feeding the animals, followed by breakfast and getting Danny ready for school. The school bus ride was long, 45 minutes each way, but Danny didn't seem to mind. He was excited to be enrolled in school again after missing several weeks. During his transitions between placements, afternoons were for homework and ranch work, with Tom teaching Danny more advanced skills as the boy proved himself capable and responsible. Evenings were for dinner, household chores, and the quiet conversations that were building a foundation of trust between them. Danny threw himself into ranch life with an enthusiasm that sometimes surprised Tom. The boy seemed to have an instinctive understanding of animals and a natural aptitude for the work. He learned to handle the horses confidently, helped repair fencing without complaint, and took pride in the increasing responsibilities Tom gave him. But more than that, Danny brought something to the ranch that Tom hadn't realized he'd been missing: purpose beyond mere survival. Teaching the boy, watching him learn and grow, seeing his confidence build with each new skill mastered, it all gave Tom a reason to think beyond just getting through each day. One evening in November, as they sat by the fireplace after a particularly cold day, Danny looked up from the book he was reading. "Tom, are you happy I came to live here?" Tom set down his own book and looked at the boy seriously. "Danny, you've made this place feel like home again. I didn't realize how much I'd missed having someone to share it with." "I've never had a home like this before," Danny said quietly. "I mean, my grandma's house was nice, but it was small and in town. This feels like having the whole world to ourselves. It is pretty special." Tom agreed. "And Danny, I'm glad you're here to share it." That night, as Tom listened to the familiar sounds of the house settling down for the night, He realized that the silence he'd once found so overwhelming was gone. Not because the ranch was noisy now, but because it was filled with the comfortable presence of family. The rusty gate remained silent in the evening breeze. Its voice no longer needed to keep Tom company. The Double C Ranch had found its voice in the laughter of a boy who had learned to trust again, in the daily conversations between a man and a child who were building something new together, and in the growing certainty that sometimes the most important things in life arrive not when we're looking for them, but when we're brave enough to open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. Spring arrived early on the Double C Ranch, bringing with it the kind of renewal that made even the most weathered rancher believe in new beginnings. Tom stood in the pasture, watching Danny work with Ranger under his careful supervision. In the 6 months since the boy had arrived, the transformation in both of them had been remarkable. Danny, now 11, had grown 3 inches and gained the kind of confidence that came from knowing he belonged somewhere. He handled the horses with an ease that impressed even Tom, and his natural ability with animals had become apparent to everyone who visited the ranch. More importantly, Danny had learned to trust that this home was permanent. The wariness that had characterized his early weeks at the Double C had gradually given way to the comfortable security of a child who knew he was wanted. "Tom," Danny called from across the pasture. "Watch this." Tom smiled as he watched Danny guide Ranger through a series of turns using only gentle pressure from his knees and subtle shifts in his weight. The boy had become an accomplished rider, but more than that, he had developed the kind of partnership with the horses that couldn't be taught, only earned through patience and understanding. "That's excellent, Danny. You and Ranger are really working together now." Danny's grin was brilliant as he rode back toward Tom. "He understands what I want before I even ask. It's like we can read each other's minds. That's what happens when you take the time to really understand an animal," Tom said, patting Ranger's neck as Danny dismounted. "They respond to trust and consistency. Kind of like people, I guess," Danny said thoughtfully. Tom nodded, struck once again by the boy's wisdom. "Exactly like people." As they walked back toward the barn, Danny bouncing with the energy of an 11-year-old who had spent the morning doing exactly what he loved, Tom reflected on how much their relationship had evolved. What had started as careful politeness had grown into the comfortable familiarity of family. Danny had learned to read Tom's moods, knowing when the rancher needed quiet and when he was ready to talk. He had discovered Tom's dry sense of humor and learned to give as good as he got in their gentle teasing exchanges. Most importantly, he had learned that Tom's word was solid. When the man said something, it happened. Tom, in turn, had rediscovered the joy of teaching, of watching someone discover new abilities and build confidence. He had remembered what it felt like to worry about someone else's day, to take pride in another person's accomplishments, to plan for a future that included more than just his own needs. "Tom," Danny said as they put away the riding equipment, "Sarah called yesterday while you were in town. She's coming for a visit next week." Tom nodded. Sarah's monthly visits had become routine, but this one felt different. They had been discussing the possibility of making Danny's placement permanent, not just foster care, but legal adoption. The paperwork was in progress, but there were still formalities to complete. "Are you nervous about it?" Tom asked. "A little," Danny admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if they decide I can't stay?" Tom put his hand on Danny's shoulder, understanding the fear that came from having been moved so many times before. "Danny, look at me." The boy raised his eyes to meet Tom's. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home, and I'm your family now. The adoption is just making official what's already true. Promise?" "I promise." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a routine they had developed that involved Danny making salad, while Tom handled the main course. Danny brought up something that had been on his mind. "Tom, can I ask you about your wife?" Tom paused in his stirring, surprised by the directness of the question. In all their months together, Danny had never asked about Margaret, though Tom suspected he had noticed the wedding ring Tom still wore in the framed photo on the mantelpiece. "What would you like to know? What was she like? And do you think she would have liked me?" Tom set down his spoon and turned to face Danny, recognizing the importance of the question. "Her name was Margaret, and she was the kindest person I've ever known." She loved this ranch, but more than that, she loved the idea of filling it with family. Tom smiled, remembering. She would have adored you, Danny. She would have loved watching you with the horses, listening to your questions, seeing how hard you work. Did you want to have kids together? Very much. We tried for years. And when that didn't work, we decided to adopt. We were actually in the middle of the process when she got sick. Danny absorbed this quietly. Is that why you wanted to adopt me? Because of her? Tom considered the question carefully, wanting to give an honest answer that didn't diminish Danny's importance as an individual. Partly, he said finally, Margaret always believed this ranch was meant to be shared with family. But Danny, I didn't decide to adopt you because of her. I decided because of you, because you belong here, because we're good for each other, because you've made my life better in ways I didn't even know I needed. Danny smiled, satisfied with the answer. I wish I could have met her. I think you would have liked each other very much. The following